Khelsilem, thank you for joining us. What happens with the child welfare negotiations now?
There's a number of processes that will have to take place, one of which is the formation of a Children's Chiefs Commission that was mandated by resolutions at the recent Special Chiefs Assembly. That would include representation from all the regions across Canada, including regions that are no longer participating in the AFN. They would then assemble a new negotiation team with new legal advisors to then re-engage with Canada to look to make amendments to the agreement that was negotiated but ultimately rejected by the chiefs and proxies at the recent assembly.
And what would you like to see changed in the agreement?
There's a number of issues and challenges that I think that came from multiple regions. We heard that there was a number of regions that had submitted feedback to the AFN, but those changes were not incorporated. So most of the changes were cosmetic, not substantial. I think some of the changes have to deal with the long-term commitment around funding. The provisions that currently in there require annual budgetary approval processes. So even if the government were to change, future governments could still decide to underfund and discriminate against First Nations children through the previous agreement. So that would have to change. There was a lot of gaps in terms of the governance of the implementation and the structure of the implementation, including representation from the regions. It still gave a lot of authority to Canada to control and oversee the implementation, or to the AFN, or to the plaintiffs, which included two organizations from Ontario, but not fair or equal representation for all the regions across Canada. So the governance of implementation, I think, is another issue that needs to be resolved.
Okay, yeah. And one of the other big complaints that we heard is that chiefs were not involved or, kept up to speed. How will this new process change that?
That's a really good question. So, going back to July, it was announced that there was a final settlement agreement. It was then released after the July SCA, or annual general meeting. And there was a real push by the AFN to have it approved as quickly as possible without any fair process or time for First Nations leadership to review the proposal, to make amendments to the proposal, and then consider a final draft. The new process that we've approved at the Assembly recently is that there has to be a period of time of 120 days when a final agreement is put forward for chiefs to be able to review and understand the agreement. There has to be a process where there's a back and forth with the regions and with the First Nations that a draft agreement be put forward, and there's an opportunity to provide more feedback, more recommendations, amendments if needed, until all the regions can build consensus and support. So it really speaks to process, that we're going to have enough time to include the experts, include the First Nations leadership that want to be consulted meaningfully on this. And so my nation, for example, Squamish Nation, sent multiple letters to both Canada and the AFN objecting to their process, which we received no response to. So our hope is that the new process will be transparent and communicate through a back and forth dialogue.
That sounds great. And we still haven't heard from the national chief. Do you know what her role is in this now?
I would say that what's been challenging is that a lot of the conversations and discussions that are on this from the AFN have been led through the National Chief's office. The National Chief, prior to becoming National Chief, was the portfolio holder for this item, and then chose to retain that portfolio after being elected as National Chief. So has been a main key point person and spokesperson overseeing the file. And I think it speaks to a real challenge of her leadership, that she's oversaw the complete failure of approval by the chiefs at the recent Special Chiefs Assembly. The fact that they've spent multiple years negotiating this to get to a place where the chiefs resoundingly rejected, I think speaks to a real disconnect between the National Chief and what First Nations across the country are wanting to see. So I think there needs to be a change in approach. I think some of the commentary we've seen from the National Chief as well has been very inflammatory towards those who opposed the final settlement agreement. There hasn't been acknowledgement, I think, by the National Chief of the real fundamental flaws that were identified. And I think an acknowledgement that there needs to be a commitment to a better process, a new process that builds consensus, builds strength and unity, and not a divisive process.
Has anyone from the federal government reached out to you at all?
No, we sent a letter to the Prime Minister and Minister Patty Haiju in August, We sent another one in October and follow up to our August letter. We have received no response, no communication, no response of any kind from Canada, which I think is a real disappointment. When Canada speaks to reconciliation, engaging with First Nations, and they haven't responded to our concerns or even our requests to meet to discuss the matter. You know, our contention and our point is that Canada cannot discharge its duties to delegate the role of consulting First Nations to the AFN, that Canada has to play a role in directly consulting and engaging with First Nations as title and rights holders directly. But we've been disappointed to receive no response so far.
Well, you know, we're really going to be following this quite closely, but we'll have to leave the interview there. That's Khelsilem, the council chairperson of the Squamish Nation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.